Hi, I'm Shane Brinkman-Davis, and once again, this is LiveCoding. This is LiveCoding number 5, and I am doing these in association with GenUI.co, a consulting company here in Seattle that I work with, and my own company, Kimmy. And today, what I wanted to do is there's this great project called Realworld, which takes, I think it's pretty much all, I guess it's more than just JavaScript. But it takes front end and back end frameworks and tries to implement the same real world example app across all frameworks so you can compare them with each other. In theory, it's a more real world app than most apps, example apps. There's like a login and there's different ways, things that happen. And you can mix and match front ends and back ends because it's a standardized API. But today, what I want to do is, for my own personal edification, I want to learn a bit more about what the specs are. I've been looking at the specs in doc form, and they are not super clear, to be fair. They're not incomplete, but I think they don't really quite determine the specs all by themselves. So what I want to do is I wanted to go dive into one of these example apps and explore it. And I thought you might like to do that with me. And the most obvious one is the first one on their list. Actually, let's just go back over to their site here. So here's the Real World home site. It's a GoThinkster/Realworld, but I think if you just Google Real World example apps, this will come up. And the very first one is the React Redux, which is what I'm going to look at today, because I am certainly most interested in that. I'm generally a React fan, and I think the Redux certainly has its merits. Although, as those of you who are following my channel know, I have my own framework, and it's opinionated, and I think that it makes life easier than React and Redux do. My ultimate goal is I'm going to actually code the version of this real-world app in my framework and show its merits. But in order to do that, I need to understand the specs, and the specs are not super clear, especially if you're not doing it in the DOM, which I will not be doing, because they have just drop-in CSS files and so forth, from what I've been able to determine, and I can't just drop them in because I have a different framework. So let's go, without further ado, let's go back to the React Redux, and let's go ahead and see if we can get it running. So first I'm going to clone it here. And I think we can, no, wait a second before we do that, npm install. npm start's not going to work very well without npm install. So I'm now installing all of their dependencies, which will take just a moment here. And as that's going, let's go ahead and take a look here at what is going on in their description. They tell us what to do, clone the repo, npm install, npm start. Great, we're doing that. They are running against an existing backend API, so this is just all the client-side app here. The API specs are not too badly defined. It's just the client-side interface that is not super well defined, which is why we are where we are. Look, 41 vulnerabilities. I never know how to read these. Certainly, if you'd like to give me a quick summary or link me to how you understand, I just installed this. This should be late, great, best stuff. And look, I've got 6 high vulnerabilities. Should I be freaking out about that? I don't think so. But I'm not going to mess around with it. npm start. Look, it even opens up a browser window for me. That's nice. All right, here is the app. And so you can start by sort of seeing the different parts that are going on here. We've got home, sign in, sign up at the top. We've got people who use this as an excuse to put curse words up because, I don't know what, we're in junior high. But these are a bunch of keywords here, and you can heart things. Well, that is an interesting example right there, isn't it? Unhandled rejection error. Wow, that's not a very good implementation now, is it? Anyway, let's go back. You can't even go back. I'm not quite sure. That's an interesting interface when that happens. But let's go and we pop in here. We can see this. This is some person. I can follow them, but that also causes an error. That's an interesting little glitch there. I'm looking forward to improving on that with my version. So sign in, sign up. I've never signed up, so let's go ahead and just go through. Presume home is just right here. Conduit is also right here. Let's go through sign up. Actually, before we do that, I just want to see. So if we're in on a person and we say home, goes home. For in on a person, we press conduit, it goes home. They've got a terrible but effective paginator at the bottom here, and some layout issues. Read more buttons, more layout issues. But otherwise, pretty straightforward. Another sign in, sign up at the bottom. So let's try it. Let's do some sign ups. I use that most of the time. You can all see my email, which is totally fine by me, and I'm just going to try some password stuff. No, I don't even really need to save this password, thank you. Password is too short. So it's got a password requirement. Let's say, I'll do my standards one longer. It seems to have liked that just fine. Cool. So let's see what else we can do here. One, we've got a broken image alert here, which is weird. What happens if we reload the page? First of all, it does maintain state across page reloads. That's cool. But it just has a broken image thing there. That's kind of strange also in the not great experience. If I hit settings, I can do a bio. I can tell a URL to my profile picture, but if it's missing, it does that. Short bio about you. I like to make designer programming tools. Truth in action. So I can set a new password, or I can log out. Let's try signing back in now that we got this going here. Shane B. Davis. Logs me in. Yeah, I don't want to save that. That's just fine. Settings. Did not save it because you have to click the update settings, I guess. I like to write designer create programming tools. All right, let's do some update settings. I kind of want to see how well this works, so let's just do my gravatar. And can I just look up a gravatar here really quick? I know that there's a page where you can just put in an email address and get the gravatar. Here we go. ShaneBDavis@gmail.com. Whoa, look at all those things. Are better. I guess that's my rating. It's kind of funny, really. I want to just see more details of my gravatar. But right now it's fine. I just want to copy the image address and see if I can just drop it in here and see if it works. Hey, look at that. There I am. So my feed, no articles yet. Global feed is just everything, I guess. This is the home page. I do a new post. Article title, Testing Out Real World. React plus Redux in the real world. Anyone getting a Matrix flashback? I'm getting a little bit of a Matrix flashback. Maybe it's because I just watched it the other night. Still a good movie. How does React Redux hold up? Enter tags, React, Redux. They don't really tell me how the tags are supposed to work, so I'm just putting spaces. We'll see what that does. It says publish, and I can write a comment. I think they're doing okay. I can edit the article, I can delete the article, no spacing between those, a little bit of a layout, less than lovely. But otherwise, all right, not too bad. All right, yeah. You know, a classic thing is to do something like this, right? See if there's any script hacking going on. Looks like they passed that one. Let's go here too. Looks like they passed that one. It's always nice to check. So I'm starting to get a feel of how the functionality works. Popular tags. So we have a tag here. Hashtag baby. Does that actually, that doesn't do anything. Not terribly surprised, honestly. But there's no interface for putting in your own tag, which is kind of weird. My feed. What? No articles yet under my feed. Look, global feed, I'm there. And wait, what? Anyone else finding that weird? That there's nothing showing up under your feed? This app is kind of buggy, which is weird for like this being the #1 example app in their list. I can edit my profile settings from here. That's cool enough. I wanted to see here, like I've made some tags, right? You guys all remember me making tags, right? They don't show up here and I can't click on them. Nope. What if I put a hashtag in front of it? Nope. It's a mystery. Totally doesn't work. Okay, well, continuing on, and that doesn't work. So this is kind of broken, and for reasons I don't really understand. But that's enough for right now. Let's go look at the code. That's what we're here for. Okay, we're just going to leave that running, so I want to look at it. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to do that. Hopefully you can still see what's on the bottom here with my overlay. All right, let's view this thing. All right, so we just have some package JSON and a README and a project logo. That's great. Source and public. So public just has a favicon and index.html, which is pretty minimal. Let's see here. They're loading the fonts. That's all well and good. And some CSS and some icons. And seeing all this here, this is the fonts that they want to use, Merriweather and so forth. So I'm going to have to bring that in for my stuff too. Ionic Framework has their own icons, which I discovered looking at this, called Ionicons. And if you go to that as a domain, Ionicons, ionicons.com, super cool. But here's my favorite part, is that you can do something like share, and you can have material style or iOS style. Well, it's sort of iOS style. It's not quite like the native app ones, but you could generate 2 different icon sets for iOS and Android, so it feels a little bit more native on each. Super cool. Well done, Ionic. If you're looking for free icons, you also should check out Font Awesome and check out their website. They've got a ton of free icons here and a lot more paid icons, but that's 1,500 free icons right here. And last but not least is Ico Moon. Also has tons of free icons, and you can mix and match and generate icon fonts. I kind of moved past icon fonts. I don't like icon fonts that much. One of the problems is that sometimes icon fonts don't load. They just don't. And when they don't load, then all of a sudden your icons break in weird ways that are not really very detectable programmatically, because you can't detect if a font is loaded in a reliable sort of way, because web browsers. The way how like Google does it, Google's official font loading tool, is it loads up it attempts to render a character from a font, and it measures its width. And if its width is different from the default font's width, it assumes that it has loaded correctly. It's terrible, and it's not totally reliable. It's a total hack. Anyway, that's a side thing into icons. I like to actually export them as SVGs and then use the SVGs in my apps these days. But in my main production app, like Zostream.com, this is my stuff, all these icons are actually coming from font icons and then rendered to the canvas. So that works pretty well. So moving right along, we're looking at source. So that's all they're doing here. They're mostly loading all the fonty things. And they have a few things like setting the viewport and so forth so that it's mobile friendly. And div root, I presume, is how they're going to hook in the actual live content. So that's all that's in public. The rest of it is live stuff. So we start here at index. So we got React DOM, we got React Redux, and we've got store, I'm not, that's a different file right here, so take a look at that at the moment, React Router and React Router Redux. And then they promptly render the root page here, and they attach it to root. And clearly, let's go ahead and, I'm more of a fan. I still haven't quite gotten used to code yet, but files here, yeah, this is the right spot. Source index.js. I like my Sublime text, but clearly it was not syntaxizing correctly. So let's go somewhere that's going to present this in the best possible light. All right, so yes, they're going to attach it to the root element, and they're going to render the provider component at the root, wrapping around the connected router, wrapping around a switch, wrapping around whatever the route is. That looks like a lot of boilerplate to me to do routing, but total amount of code is pretty straightforward. And then the history is coming from store. Let's see what store's got for us. Store's what store and store. There should be some, I think I can turn this on and off. Search, great, cool. I do like that part of code. So we are exporting history, which is creating the history, which is a browser history object coming from the history library. And we are doing some get middleware stuff. Which is some various routery kinds of things. They want to do it differently in production. This seems like a really clunky way to do this, incidentally. Like they could just conditionally add that one field. Everything else is the same, right? Creating a logger if it's not in production. You could easily imagine them doing it like this, right? Does it make sense to people watching this? I could say, presumably that would work just as well, and then you could just do this, and it would just be a whole lot of more simpler. Then we could actually go and say that and that and that, and then we would all be like, oh, that makes me happy, and I can actually, yep, there we go. So, little simplification right there. All right, but let's continue on our path. Looks like recent files, that's cool. So we're looking at index. Mostly we're gonna be interested in, let's just see what these other files are. What's agent doing? We got agent, oh, we got middleware. Actually, middleware is a thing here. What is middleware doing? I probably shouldn't dive too much into these, so I'm gonna keep this to be a reasonably short live code. Promise middleware, routing a store, and then it's returning a new function which routes an index. Someone likes currying, I detect. That's a whole lot of currying style coding. I have to honestly say that I don't like this naming. I'm critical. I'm sorry. I just get it. Promise middleware. You tell me what promise middleware does. Go on. Anyone? It's not. Functions should be named as a verb phrase. An action with possible nouns saying what it's doing. It could possibly be a descriptive phrase to describe what it returns, in which case it's a descriptive phrase. Promise middleware is neither. I might as well call this thing temp. It does suggest to me that it does something with promises. Thanks. Okay. So that's just a problem with reading the source code here, but really let's dive into the meat of it here. So components, constants, and reducers. I'm not finding this tree view quite as good as, or as easy to read. Maybe it's because it's so compressed, but that's probably just what I'm used to in Sublime Text. I am glad that they only indented by 2 here. A lot of people still use 4 indents. I started with 8 space indents a long time ago, and then I went to 4, and then I discovered 2. Maybe someday I'll switch to 1. But more and more, 2 is plenty. You can totally see it with 2, with just a little bit of practice. And 4 sound makes everything just spread way out and wastes your horizontal space. Anyway, let's go here. So this is a Redux thing. So Redux, you describe all your action types by creating a file like this. All I can say is not very dry. So one of my problems with Redux is it's not very dry. It's highly freaking redundant. Look at this. Why does this file exist at all? All the file says is this name is that name, and they're identical all the way across. I just have all kinds of reasons to say that's not great. It's, if nothing else, it's just a ton of maintainability. When you're adding, removing, refactoring, you have to go update all of this exactly properly for no reason. There's like no benefit to doing this other than a poorly designed framework. The client of a framework should be completely dry as possible, which is to say, you should never have to define things twice, for sure. Anyway, so we come over here to reducer, and look, we got more. We got to bring it in here to bring it in here. So there we already have several more levels of replication. So now there's 4 levels of this replication for all of it just to trigger this one method. We had to have this keyword in 4 places 4 times. Not to mention the place where we trigger it, which is going to be over here somewhere. Let's go and find that real quick. I wonder if I can just do this. Find in folder, perfect. Find in folder that, I run it, and so there's also over here, I have to import it and then trigger it. So I have to use that keyword 6 times in order to trigger that action. So we will note that in a later presentation when I show you my framework, where you only have to do it twice. You define it once in the model, define it once where you use it. So down from 6 to 2. All right, let's go back to our work here. There's a lot to command Redux. I'm going to wail on a little bit because of the lack of dryness. I really think that's a major problem. But the fact that it is a pure functional system means it eliminates tons of errors in a very clean way. So I give them some kudos for that. All right, but I did want to take just a little bit more look at that reducer we just picked up, article. So article page loaded. So when article page loads, then we are merging in a state, switch action type. So it gives us a state and an action is what the reducers are doing. So the action has a .type and a payload. And so when an article page loads, then we have an article. Oh my gosh, this is super manual. So then we have, so the page loads, and we have to go see what loads it, but the page loads, and then we're going to pass through an article and comments. We're going to extract that from the payload, which is why we're that it's 0 and 1. Like, why isn't the payload just like this? It's my immediate question. Like, obviously the payload is just an article and a comment, so why is it also an array? And is this really just an object like this? Is it just an object with a single field? I have a suspicion it is. So that seems like a redundant structure. I don't know if that's Redux, because I'm not hugely familiar with Redux, or if that's just part of the way how this particular implementation is using Redux. But continuing right along. That just is added complexity for no particular reason. We don't need an array and an object just to pass a single named field through. In fact, just using JavaScript, one might care to think about how action.comment ID, like you can pass through anything, I think. I think you can pass through any structure you want, because comment ID, I can't imagine that's built into Redux. So another thing I don't love about this is switch statements in general. A switch statement from an OO perspective is an indicator of bad structured design. A switch statement is a failure to use OO effectively. It's a failure to use built-in routing tools in your framework because you're writing a manual routing tool. I'm on my high horse, and I want to keep moving on this. So let's keep moving. Anyway, so it looks pretty straightforward. So we're going to merge into the global state here, the current article and the current set of comments, which is what we're going to render for the current page. That's all well and good, but you do want to realize one little thing that's going on here. Article and comments is global for the entire app, which means that they cannot have, for example, which is one of the things I've been developing lately into my stuff, is a stack of pages in the app. Now, they probably might argue that that's what the browser history is for, and that's not a terrible argument, I suppose. Depends on how well they're using the browser history to store this data, because I suspect that the browser history really just has a link to an article ID, and so if you press the back button, it might have to reload that data from the remote server. But the point being is that they can't have more than one instance of an article activated in the app at once, because it's global. It's not localized to that component that's rendering that article. That is not inherently the fault of Redux in this case. However, I think it probably is the case that actually this state should not be stored in Redux at all. This state should be stored in the component state. And that's just a design consideration for when you're designing React style apps, is that anytime you have a component that you would potentially want to render more than once with a different ID, with a different source data, it should store that state within each different component, not in some global store like Redux. And rendering an article seems quite plausible. You'd want to be able to render more than one article, more than one different article within one presentation. Anyway, this looks pretty straightforward. Article page unloaded doesn't even do anything, which is interesting that there is an event for that at all because it's a no-op. Add comments. So we have all this add comment stuff, which just does sort of what you think it might do, but I do wonder if, so this just adds a comment to the existing state. Local clients, I'd say this does not handle the remote update at all. Another thing I'll be talking about in my presentation where that would actually all happen simultaneously with a single method invocation. But this is all being handled kind of manually here. But you get the idea. Keep remembering this state going through here, which freaking the hover overlays in code are failing me a little bit here. That state is the global state in Redux. Now remember, it's not actually mutable. It is each time the Redux cycle happens, it creates a whole new state object, which is a merge of the previous state and the modifications to make a whole new state. In which case, you can roll back to a previous state by just replacing it with one of the previous states. So that is what's cool about Redux. It's cool, but how often do you really need to do that? And even still, actually my system, in theory, provides that functionality as well, but it provides it in a way that I think is, This is about Redux and React, which are quite competent, they do great, and they're used by big companies to do big things. But they're also used by big companies, which means big companies can afford to pay the programmers to waste a little more of their time by doing things like writing this 6 times. All right, I'm off my high horse. Let's go look at some of these components. So, app.js. I was a little confused about what it was rendering here in Redux. So, route, connected router, provider. Those all seem like none of those are probably local to this app, I think. So how does it actually start rendering? How does it link into the app? How does it render app, like app.js, right? Because that presumably is like the root component, one would think. Oh, interesting. They are not using hooks. I thought that this would be exemplifying hooks, which is the latest, hottest in React. Also not a huge fan of that because I am a fan of OO in general. I like OO plus functional, not functional as a replacement to OO. That's just my bias. But this is classes. Look, classes. So they are not using hooks for this demo, which is interesting. Probably because this was written before hooks and hasn't been updated. I just about guarantee. But I do want to see if we can see where app is getting loaded in the source. Where is it getting referenced? Case sensitive, class app, import app from app. Oh, there we go. So there it is. Wrapper, and then it is passing in a property called component, which is then rendering app. So route is rendering the app itself at some later stage. Great, that works just fine. Now we understand where that's coming from. Let's go up here, and it does start with app. So here we go. So whenever I'm reading components in React, I usually want to go straight to the render function. Now, if there's any like declaration structure here, there's not really any declaration structure. It is nice to sort of know what is the state like and what are the props like, but there's nothing here that really tells me that. So I'm just going to go straight to the render function, which will kind of tell me. So this.props.app loaded, that's cool. App name. So if it's not loaded, then it's not going to render. Then it's going to else return this, which is, just an empty header, looks like. It shares a lot of the same. I don't really know why they didn't wrap this in an if, which seems like it would make sense to me. I'm not a big fan of JSX, as you wouldn't be surprised. And maybe you're not allowed to do that in JSX, or you're not allowed to write like an if statement right here. I'm not sure. I think you may not be able to. I don't know. If you can, though, it totally makes sense to put the if statement right there, because otherwise it's shared code, and this is not dry code, it is wet code. Anyway, so the header is the same. In a lot of ways, that header should probably be its own component just because it's a separate sort of thing. Then they're doing a switch, which must be importing from somewhere up here. Switch is part of the router. So it's deciding which path to render. I don't know what the switch is doing exactly. So we'd have to go look at what. This all has to do with whatever your URL is, you want it to present the right page as if it were a web page app, but it isn't. It's a client-side rendered app. And that's what this magic is all doing. So this is just how the router works, which honestly is still a little bit clunky. But not terrible, just a little bit clunky. They've had to declare this in a few places to set up the route. Like the main thing I see this is strange that, wherever our original index.js is down here, like what's all this rendering here? Like why do we have a switch around the route in the first place? That seems like that's not even necessary. It seems like the person writing this didn't quite know what they're doing, because why would they have a switch around a route which is going to render the app, which then has a switch? That seems unnecessary. I don't know, but maybe you have to always have a switch attached to a route. Maybe there's like subpathing in the route system. I don't know, it still seems overly convoluted. Okay, so let's go back up to the app. So anyways, it renders these things. It renders like the home page. And this is, let's go look at home as index probably. Yeah. So, and this probably brings in the banner and the main view and the tags. So here we are doing the rendering of the home page. And this is part of why I'm not a big fan of JSX. Look at all that garbage. That is all totally wet garbage. There's no need to have all of these closed things here. It just doesn't add anything, but it requires stuff to be maintained. Anyway, so here we go. We're rendering the banner, which is another component, and then we're rendering some divs here. We're rendering the main view, which is another component, and some divs, and we're rendering the popular tags on the right, and here's the tags component, which is rendering the tags, and we're passing the tags all the way through, which they're coming in from somewhere. Where is, let's go back up to the top. So where is, so if I render tag, we're looking at home. Home isn't getting anything passed to it, not in any props. So how does home get the information that it is rendering? It's a good question. Component will mount this props.token promise, this props.unload, this props.load. All right, so this is some interesting, like convoluted stuff here that is just trying to stuff props with the things that you need here from some other place. Args to promise this to promise a token, or if we have a token, then it goes to the articles.feed, otherwise it goes to articles.all. I'm guessing the route stuff is going to pass this token through, which is going to choose which agent we're going to go through and use here, which is going to be an article's promise, which then we can resolve. And it does all this onloady stuff. I wonder what if onload is a special thing for React. Onload, unload for props. But it's super clunky. I mean, like, first of all, component, you should almost never, ever be dealing with cleaning up stuff when your component goes out of scope. You should have a framework that is set up to automatically correctly deal with the stuff going out of scope. Certainly sometimes there's edge cases where it just doesn't make sense for the framework to take care of it. But in this case, it seems to me like the framework should be taking care of this, particularly since this is like a standard thing. It's just like initializing the standard props for each of these pages, which I would think, I mean, agent.tags, I would think that this is ultimately coming out of the global state of Redux. Which is another interesting thing is that there's no little definition of what the structure of the global state of Redux is here. I suppose maybe if you're doing TypeScript, that's how you would do it. But I like to have a declarative way that declares these things so I can just go see them and see how their structure is. I don't really know what the structure of the global state is, other than to go inspect each of the reducers. Okay, anyway. Map dispatch to props. Wow, this is just so convoluted. On click, on load, on unload. Wow, this just seems like a lot to understand. And so I'm coming from a person who kind of understands old school React, have not really used Redux other than reading it theoretically. Can you tell me what's going on with this? Presumably this onload is the same as this onload, which is like, I presume like every single thing over here is going to have something like this. Like, how incredibly redundant. I presume like each page presumably is going to have something like this. Like this. Wow, just wow. Okay, well, I think I'm kind of getting close to sort of a feel of how this is working. So they have a dispatcher to dispatch to the dispatcher of Redux. Okay, let's just say, okay. Why? Oh, why, oh, why? So yeah, I'm pretty sure that those are getting mounted onto props so that you can invoke them, which then you can dispatch. So we've got a dispatcher to the dispatcher. Really not dry, folks. And the field set. Okay, so you're starting to get a feel for how this is structured. So we've got all these different pages, and some of the pages, I find this to be kind of a strange structure. So this is the home page, but then they put the home file in the index.js. Personally, I find that to be a little inelegant, because I'm going to want to go like this. I want to jump to the home component. Nope, that's not the home component. That's the home reducer. But I can jump to the articles component. See, there's article actions. What? Article, oh, the article is the other one that's broken out. But if I can jump to the editor, right? Editor.js like that. So I think I learned this from Java, good old Java, that Java names the file after the class that's inside it. Always. And I think that's a really good pattern for any language. And so I think that should be named home, and there should be a little index.js file which includes home and returns it as the export. Or probably what I would do is, I don't like that home looks different from these. I would probably move this file up into the parent directory, call it home.js, do it just as it is, but have this be home components, because these are the support components for the home page. And then home can just import home components / all the things it needs to grab. I do think that would be a better way to organize your code here. But you can kind of see what's going on here. Like, each of these is just a bit more convoluted than I would like to see, particularly the ones that are interacting with Redux. It just is really overkill for Redux. But that's sort of the nature of Redux, I'm afraid. I'm starting to feel like I got a fairly good sense of how this works, though. I think I learned more from the actually using it over here. We still have it loaded, right? 4,000, 4,100. Yep. Guess what, guys? I broke it, evidently, when I made that change. But that's why we have Git. I wonder if it doesn't like null. There we go. It still doesn't see my articles, which I'm just all flabbergasted about that. Okay, so anyways, dragons. And you'll actually notice that, well, that one is doing that there. So if I load this page, does it actually, it does actually do that correctly. That's cool. My platform honestly doesn't do that because it's a bit of a pain to set up Webpack with Webpack dev server with live reloads and support arbitrary pathing that the client-side app interprets. So I played around with that and then I backed off. But I'll try again. Training dragons. Now, why in the world does I almost wonder like if mine didn't like get implemented properly because it does not want to save the hashtags at all. It saved this. I can delete a comment. No prompting, it just deletes it. All right, well, it seems like this is fairly straightforward to set up, honestly. I think that we can reproduce this in my framework pretty straightforward. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for today. So let's just do a little wrap-up thought here. So this is a real-world app in the sense that you have a login, you have a logout, you've got user-generated content, you've got comments, you've got different pages, you've got routing. Pretty well done in terms of what a test real-world app looks like. I think that's pretty fair. I like that part. We did see that this implementation had several bugs right off the bat, which is interesting to me. I'm a little surprised. It's also a little out of date, so we have a little bit of forgiving them for that because it's not using hooks, it's using classes for React. Redux is pretty redundant. We saw that just for each action that Redux manages, we had to put that keyword in the name of the action in 6 times throughout the source code. And that was just the start. We had like a dispatcher for the dispatcher. So you notice like when we're invoking it in the code, there's this little really weird thing. So we've got this homepage loaded Redux reducer, but then we actually created another step here, which we call unload, incidentally, but ultimately it's just the invokes homepage loaded method. So we ended up having it 2 more times here, effectively, in order to do all this routing in order to invoke homepage loaded. That seems really heavy-handed to me. So I think we can improve upon that. And again, we have this component will unmount all over the place. Homepage loaded homepage. I don't quite, like, why? What does homepage unloaded do? Let's find that out. I'm just super, super curious. I also find a little bit like the action types is just one big file called action types. Another failure of description because it's not organized in any way. But let's go over here to reducers. Like this whole file just shouldn't exist. It's just such a waste. Because they're already defining it here. We've already defining what we're handling over here. Yeah, there's a homepage unload. So yes, I am so glad that we found homepage unloaded because remember what we saw before? It's a no-op. So we've got all this stuff threading through and it's a no-op. Freaking no-op. We can do better than this. React, Redux, you can do better than this. I plead with you for the sanity of your developers. We can do better. Okay. Anyway, on the other hand, I still really love React. I love React style programming. I really love this. We're just going to render the page. I love that the code, that we're not using templates, but we're actually using code to generate output, which gives us tons more flexibility because we can use the full expressiveness of JavaScript in order to generate our output, rather than being limited to whatever our templating engine is capable of. And so we're not convoluting our solutions into what fits in the templating engine. I do think it's unfortunate that they thought JSX was the way to do it, because now you have, so they kind of did it backwards, right? So we kind of take JavaScript and we kind of overlaid it with a little bit of templating. But we still have the full capability of JavaScript. Let's see, I've been kind of wanting to, of course we can't do it. Let's see if I can do this. Let's see, true, then that, else, empty string. My guess is that's just a compile error. Oh, no, looks like it isn't. So maybe I can do that. This is list errors. That's not a very informative page to do. So yeah, I'm not as familiar with JSX, but if I can put actual JavaScript expressions here, that's nice. Of course, there are some shortcomings, like I can't say if test I can't do that, right? Because if doesn't return a value. JavaScript shortcoming, but CoffeeScript and my language caffeine script does, so you can do that sort of thing with using better than JavaScript solutions. So we'll really be able to tell this when I start doing the implementation of my version, so I can sort of show you what I mean in terms of how can we streamline this whole system. This person writing this really could have done quite a bit more right off the bat. See, look at that. Leveraging JavaScript. That's just a much better way to do this implementation. It is drying it up. And that's just using JavaScript well. Everybody can learn a little bit from that. So that, I believe, is fully legal JavaScript. And that just simplifies your front and reduces, dries it up, right? You had, otherwise, previously we had password listed twice, username listed twice, which means if any of those values change, you have to edit them twice, etc., etc. All right. So wrapping that up, I really want to ask some questions here for you. I'm kind of being a little harsh on JavaScript, on React and Redux. They're very popular right now, and for a lot of good reasons. It's good, easy to write reliable applications in them, and they're relatively streamlined compared to what you had to do in some other frameworks, relatively. But as I've been pointing out, they are wet by at least a factor of 2 to 3. In many, many ways. They are not very dry, which means that you're probably, even in pure JavaScript, writing twice as much code. I guess just looking at this, you're writing twice as much code as a better framework would force you to. This all can be done in half as much code, even in writing in JavaScript/JSX, let alone going to a language like CaffeineScript, where you can reduce JavaScript by over 3x. So I've been a little bit harsh on it. But I also want to focus on the good stuff, like React's very functional-oriented system and Redux's very functional system really reduce errors. And because state is well managed, to me, there's this sort of magical thing in the air. It's like, oh, functional, so magical. And it is in a lot of senses. But what matters is not, ooh, it's functional. It matters is state mutation is well-defined and contained. It doesn't have to be functional, like a function structural sense, so much as have a well-defined way of managing state. And then a well-defined way of having how that state gets triggered into like display updates. And that's what React does. So pretty cool. So I want to know looking at this implementation with me, and maybe you should go download it yourself, take a look at it. What is the one thing you like best about this that you think really stands out as nice? And what is the one thing that stands out as you that you like the least? I'd be curious to hear from people on those two things. I suppose my answer to the question is well-defined state management and the rendering function in React. That's sort of two things, but I can say them fairly simply. What I like the least really is, particularly with Redux, how not dry it is, how much redundant code you have to do just to boilerplate yourself up and get things working. It's just way too much, and that doesn't add anything. In fact, it actually makes your code more brittle. It is a weakness, not a strength in any way. So those are my two thoughts. My name is Shane Brinkman-Davis. I'm doing this in association with GenUI.co and my company, Kimmy. GenUI is a great place for, we do basically app design development and for product strategy for basically native apps and web apps and beyond. here in Seattle. And cheers. I hope that I get a little response. I'm curious to hear what you think about this, and I look forward to diving in. Now I feel like I've got a better understanding for diving in myself and implementing my own version of this in my framework to demo it all. All right, cheers. I will talk to you next time.